People, the time has come, because after sitting on the sidelines for what feels like a lifetime, 5 long months, I finally have an opponent. I finally have a date, and I finally know when I am going to next be boxing on Misfits, and it is a lot sooner than a lot of you guys might have expected, because in less than 3 weeks time I will be stepping back through the ropes once again to face my toughest test on Misfits to date, when I take on little Cray Cray. And once again, this fight is going to be live on the Zone worldwide. But if you're living inside the UK, let me give you lot a little tip here. As I'm recording this, for most of you I'm guessing it's nearly payday. The fight is September the 14th and it is in Newcastle. And if you don't know about Newcastle, you need to get to know, because Newcastle, in my opinion, is the best night out in the UK. The blokes are lovely, the women are even better, and the nightlife is fucking sick. So if you can, I would absolutely love it if as many of you as possible could buy tickets. It's linked in the description. That is my personal link. Misfits will then know you've come through me. Not only that, you'll get 10% off, and after I win my semi-final fight, I will 100% be in the crowd, sinking a few beers and watching the rest of the show with all of you lot that have come to support. But before we speak about my fight with little Cray Cray, I want to take it all the way back and have a little look at the journey that got me to this point. So I started boxing on the unlicensed scene about 10 years ago when I was around 20 years old, and believe me, despite legally being of age, I was just a boy back then, you know, and I was coming up against fully fledged, full-grown men, time in, time out, who were probably looking at me as if I was food to pad their records with somewhat. And, you know, I think that the experience of coming up against these type of men and trading punches with no head guards, 10-ounce gloves, in front of crowds, going out on the TV as well, sometimes I'd have thousands of people in the venue boxing, is something that has held me in such good stead to this point. But realistically, boxing was always just a hobby for me, really. It was just something that I liked to do, and I would do maybe once or twice a year in between living my normal life, where I would travel and I would party and everything else that a fella in their early 20s would be doing. But when I was on it, and I worked my way up to about 8 or 9 fights where I was unbeaten the whole way until the pandemic hit. And then once that hit, it just sort of fucked everything up for everyone, including myself, with my own boxing, where I completely lost motivation and just stopped really to focus on other things. And as I said, boxing was just basically a hobby for me. It was something that I liked to do, and I didn't earn all that much money from it. Not enough money to really make it worth my while. In the UK, we call it unlicensed boxing. In other countries, they might call it semi-pro or white collar or something like that. But we had a UK broadcaster. Our fights used to go out on the TV, but how much you got paid was dependent upon how many tickets you sold. If you sold 0 tickets, you would be paid £0. I was a good ticket seller, so I used to earn a little bit of money out of it. But when I found out that I was expecting my first daughter and we were welcoming our first child, I obviously needed to make a decision that, am I putting too much energy and too much time into this when really boxing doesn't pay the bills? Well, now it does, but back then it didn't. Anyway, after that, I spent a long time wondering what I was going to do with my life and feeling really lost. And then somehow I stumbled upon doing what I do now, which is YouTube. But probably most significantly, around this time, I met a man that is now one of my best friends in the world. You lot know him as the True Geordie. I know him as Brian. And if I'm just being completely honest with you, that is when everything started to really kick off for me. So me and Brian used to sit and for hours we would just talk about boxing. We're obviously both big combat sport fans, and he actually asked me, once he found out that I boxed unlicensed for so many years, if I would want to fight on Misfits. So for all of you lot who message me all the time asking how to get on Misfits, yes, the obvious: create content, build a following, make a name for yourself. But ultimately, it doesn't help to have a friend who can slip you in through the back door. So in January this year, I dusted the gloves off once again for the first time in a good couple of years after thinking that I'd never really box again, and I boxed in actually a huge event put on at the Leeds Arena. It has a capacity of about 10,000 people when I took on an influencer in Most Wanted. Now this one went 3 rounds. I was very conscious of trying to get the rounds in this fight. I always felt like Most Wanted was probably overmatched with me in there, and that's no shame on him, you know. He hadn't really boxed before and he hadn't had anywhere near the amount of experience that I had, so fair play to him for taking the fight. But after about 3 rounds of boxing, I did manage to get the stoppage in that one. Now at this point, Misfits, with a huge helping hand from Brian, think up the idea of doing a lightweight tournament. And when I was asked if I wanted to be one of the contenders in this tournament, you know what happened. I absolutely jumped at the chance. So after a quick turnaround, we got our passports and headed out to Nashville, Tennessee to box Street Beef's legend, Baby Hulk, a man that has had millions and millions of views on YouTube on his fights. And obviously Baby Hulk was more of an MMA fighter, a backyard brawler than a boxer. But believe me, this man had a presence. This man had so much confidence and he had a lot of power in his hands. Never been knocked out, and would legit fuck up most people in a street fight, including myself. But luckily for me, it wasn't a street fight. It was a boxing match under boxing rules. And after coming through a little bit of an early onslaught, I did manage to settle into that one and managed to record a first round stoppage. Now that same night, one of the other quarterfinal fights was taking place, and that was between Yuddy Gang and Little Cray Cray. And that fight was actually called off bizarrely after 2 rounds because of a security threat inside the venue. If you know, you know. But I really felt sorry for Little Cray Cray because at the time it was called off, the fight was really going his way and it was heavily favoured probably that Cray Cray was going to come through that. I even had a chat myself with Cray Cray once the venue was evacuated outside, and at the time he thought he was going to go back in there and get back into the ring and box again, which in my head's madness. That takes a lot of guts and willpower to be able to have that high of fighting, then come back down and be prepared to go back in there. But ultimately he didn't have to go back in there and the fight was rescheduled. Now in the rescheduled fight, Cray Cray pretty much picked up where he left off, but I've always credited Yuddy Gang as being a very intelligent fighter, and he actually showed that intelligence and the ability that he had in that fight. He did something that we hadn't seen him do before, and that was switch to southpaw for big chunks of the fight. And ultimately, over 5 rounds in a very competitive fight, Yuddy Gang beat Cray Cray and therefore eliminated him from the lightweight tournament, which meant that Yuddy Gang would go on to face the Argentinian King, and I would go on to fight the winner of the fight between Ace Musa and Walid Sharks. And I made a video on this before, and I actually picked Ace Musa as my winner in that fight. I think if that fight had taken place, Ace Musa would have won the fight. I like Ace Musa. I think he's a really nice guy and a very talented fighter. However, I'll lay my cards on the table. I really wanted Walid Sharks to win that fight for selfish reasons, because I wanted to be the man to take Walid Sharks' scalp and knock him out. But the world works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? Because on fight week, Walid Sharks was forced to pull out through injury, and drafted in was, guess who? You've probably guessed it, Little Cray Cray, who obviously for me was probably the next best option in there. I know he had lost and been eliminated from the tournament, but let's look at it. He was in there with the man that ended up in the final. Cray Cray pushed him all the way over the 7 odd rounds that they shared in a very competitive fight. So it was very clear to me that Cray Cray was obviously one of the best fighters in this weight division. And it was actually a really competitive fight between Ace Musa and Little Cray Cray. A fight in which both men showed their quality and the skills that they have to offer. And despite Cray Cray winning the fight, I've got a feel for Ace Musa, man. Like, he would have spent a whole camp bringing in sparring partners that replicated the style of Walid Sharks, only for on fight week, once he had already travelled to America, to find out that he's not fighting Walid Sharks and he's now fighting a southpaw, someone whose style is completely different to Walid Sharks, meaning he would have no preparation to get ready for the man man that he was now fighting in just a few days. And believe it or not, I know how this feels, man. Never on this stage, obviously, but I've been in a situation where I've had opponents pull out on the day of the fight, and I've ended up having to get in the ring with someone I knew nothing about and had no preparation for. So I do think that Ace Musa was massively unlucky there, and obviously that went against him. And if you're writing Ace Musa off now, I think that would be at your peril, because I very much believe that he can mix it with all of them in this lightweight division. But all of that being said, despite me noting that it was a very competitive fight, I don't feel like it was a controversial decision at the end of the fight. I did sit and score the fight to little cray cray. However, boxing is subjective, and it can come down to what you like, you know, when you're scoring a fight, what you're looking to see. And therefore, I can understand why there were complaints about the decision, but for me, the right man won on the night. Now, on the same night, the man I picked before a punch was thrown to be stood opposite me in the final of this tournament in Yadi Gang beat another old friend of mine, the Argentinian King. And this was easily Yadi Gang's best performance, not only in the tournament, but on Misfits so far. He showed a lot of skills, he showed a real good engine, and he got his game plan perfectly right. And the Argentinian King did have moments of success against Yadi Gang, but ultimately I do think that he was just in there with a more skilled, well-rounded fighter. Now, you may think that from the beef, if you want to call it that, you've seen me have with the Argentinian King, I would be looking to be petty here and would be looking at this as a perfect time to slag the Argentinian King off and say something derogatory about him, but you would be wrong. It may have crossed my mind too, once or twice, but I've got to call it for what it is, man. Despite the fact that I think he probably took a lot of his trash talking about me a bit too far. He was sprouting a lot of bollocks and some personal shit that I wouldn't use myself as trash talk towards an opponent. I'm also not one for kicking a man when he's down. And I heard in an interview after the fight, the Argentinian King possibly thinking about retirement. Now, listen, if you want to retire and it's time for you to get out the sport, then who am I to question your decision? But from my point of view, I think the Argentinian King should definitely come back and have more fights on Misfits. Listen, he will never give me any credit, but I will be happy to give him some credit. The Argentinian King is a good fighter. He has good ring IQ, good fundamentals, and due to the inactivity, years of inactivity that he had before he stepped onto Misfits, I think that the best thing you can do here is just dust yourself off and go again. Get straight back on the horse and back into big fights, because there is no disgrace in losing to Yadi Gang, who has now proven himself to be one of the best men in the weight division. And despite it never being nice when you're the one on the end of the trash talk, I do actually think he's really, really entertaining, the Argentinian King. And I think that for wrong or for right reasons, that man knows how to sell a fight. So therefore, I would love to see him back in with other contenders, possibly including myself at some point on Misfits. So good luck to him. But as for me, I have now got to get past Little Cray Cray to meet Yadi Gang in the final, as I predicted. But getting past Little Cray Cray is a lot harder said than done. He's young, hungry, confident, and most importantly, a very skilled fighter. You know, you saw in his bout with Yadi Gang, who's now established himself as one of the best guys in the division, that he pushed him really hard and was really, really competitive. And he's also won a Golden Gloves title as an amateur, and you don't do those sort of things if you're not a good fighter. But I've said it from day one, and nothing along the way has ever changed my mind. I personally do not believe that Misfits Boxing has ever had a fighter like me. I've been boxing at a very decent level and sparring at an even better level for years and years now. I know the game. I've gone through the school of hard knocks at this point by now, and despite me coming up against some really good opponents in the past, every single man that I have ever stepped into a ring with, I have found out a way to beat. And despite me really respecting my opponent in Cray Cray on September the 14th, you are going to see no different to that. I'm smarter, fitter, faster, I'm punching harder, and under the careful guidance of my coach Joe Miles, even at the age now of 30, I believe I'm just getting better and better. And I'll tell you one thing you can absolutely guarantee with me: no matter how a fight is going, I am always looking to close the show and to get my opponent out of there. And on September 14th, that is going to be no different. And if that is not enough to make you want to come along and watch this fight, then I really don't know what is. 3 weeks from now, I'm going to be rolling the dice once again and taking another huge step towards changing not only mine, but also my family's life here. And to have the opportunity and to be in the position to do so is something that I just can't even put into words how grateful I am for. Because without you lot who have supported me on my journey from the start, not only on this channel, the Joey Knight boxing page, but obviously my main channel, the Joey Knight podcast, it wouldn't have happened. None of this would have been possible had I not had the support of you lot, which I'm eternally grateful for, you know. Huge shout out to Misfits. Huge shout out to Mams Taylor for giving me the platform. But most importantly, the man that makes it all happen for me and all of our team, and that is my friend Brian, the true Geordie. He don't like taking compliments, but he's going to have to here because he's been fighting my corner since the first day we met, and he's honestly gone such a long way to completely changing the future of my family's lives. But as for now, this is no time to be reflective or to be sentimental because I still have a job to do. And believe you me, I am going to get that job done. And the first thing I'll be doing once I get that job done is getting out into the crowd and sinking a few beers with friends, family, and hopefully a lot of you lot that are going to come to support me. So a lot of you have already messaged me and sent me screenshots of the ticket sales and the tickets you've bought and whatnot. And I am really grateful for that. If you want to come along, as I say, Newcastle is absolutely unreal, man. And it's a stacked card. You can look at the fights on there and see for yourself. This is one of the best cards that Misfits Boxing has put on in so long. In the description to this video is my personal link. If you buy the tickets through that link, not only are you helping me out because it then tells Misfits that you have bought the tickets to come and support me, which is going to give me more opportunities in the future, but also you're going to be helping yourself out because you're going to get a 10% discount on the tickets. People, thank you very much for making it to the end of another video. Thank you for all of the support that you lot have been giving me, and hopefully I'm going to see a lot of you there on the night. I'll see you all in the next one.